Hello. Over the last few hundred years, the work of no playwright has been performed as widely and consistently as that of Shakespeare, and today he commands more stages than ever. This evening, the BBC resumed its massive project to televise all of Shakespeare's plays. Earlier this year, Thames Television broadcast the Royal Shakespeare Company's production of Macbeth. At the moment, in London alone, there are 5 Shakespeare plays to choose from. In Moscow, he's performed as much as their national playwrights, and in New York, an enormous new theatre complex in Brooklyn is opening, which will base its repertoire on Shakespeare's plays. And up and down the country, in schools and halls and reps, Shakespeare's put on week in, week out. But there's very little agreement among critics and audience and directors and even actors as to how Shakespeare's English should be tackled. What actually constitutes good verse speaking? This prompted us to ask the Royal Shakespeare Company to develop, specifically for television, what is in fact a masterclass on Shakespeare's verse. We've been working with them on this project over the last 6 months, and this will take up 2 editions in these studios for the South Bank show. Neither we ourselves nor the Royal Shakespeare Company would claim that there's just one way of performing Shakespeare. We invited them because they have a longer tradition than anyone else of performing the plays, and we thought the way they approached the problem would lend itself to the production we had in mind. The programme involves 3 of the directors of the Royal Shakespeare Company and 6 of the leading actors. The masterclass is introduced by the joint artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company, Trevor Nunn.
Can we just ask, where do the bulk of today's audience come from? I mean, do we have any drama students?
The RSC takes workshops up and down the country, but this is the first time they've done one specifically on verse and especially for television. Trevor Nunn's most recent Shakespeare productions seen on television are The Comedy of Errors and Macbeth.
We've been seeing an unprecedented amount of Shakespeare on television recently and listening to a good deal of discussion about the background to the plays and their themes. So we thought we'd talk tonight about Shakespeare's verse and about the particular problems of verse speaking. So here to help in the work are Ian McKellen, Michael Pennington, John Barton, Jane Lapotaire, Patrick Stewart, David Suchet, Alan Howard, and Terry Hands. I think it's important to get clear right from the word go that our subject tonight is verse speaking, and that verse speaking is no more than a department of acting and not an alternative to it.
We haven't seen a Shakespeare for ages in which it's possible to realize that he wrote in iambic pentameters. And I should like to feel that this production is the end of a long corridor, and that somebody started putting on again a very simple Shakespeare. Shakespeare as the Elizabethans might have seen it.
Since the Royal Shakespeare Company, by tradition, puts sense and sensitive characterization first, who can wonder if the speaking of the verse lacks a certain elocutionary zeal?
It is indicative of the way modern RSC productions make us listen.
What was once, only a few years ago, a new way of speaking Shakespeare, a manner of great intellectual and emotional power and scrupulously attentive to the text, is now no longer even functional.
What an extraordinary company this is. All through this season, I've been saying how much better their speaking of verse is than it has been lately. And now, here is a production in which hardly any of the cast seem to have any idea at all what their words mean.
Why do the actors recite and declaim their lines in such an old-fashioned way, as if the play was not produced in 1973, but in 1793?
Well, it's clear from those snatches of criticism that people disagree pretty violently about how Shakespeare's language should be presented. And I suppose the point is people always have, and it's certainly not our intention tonight to lay down any laws. Styles of verse speaking have, of course, changed perceptibly since the war, and hugely since the turn of the century. Olivier's call to arms, in his own film of Henry V, made in 1944, is justly famous.
On all you noblest English whose blood is fetched from fathers of war-proof, fathers that like so many Alexanders have in these parts from morn till even fought, and sheathed their swords for lack of argument, dishonor not your mothers. Now attest that those whom you called fathers did beget you. Be copy now to men of grosser blood and teach them how to war. And you, good yeomen, whose limbs were made in England, show us here the mettle of your pasture. Let us swear that you are worth your breeding, which I doubt not, for there is none of you so mean and base that hath not noble lustre in your eyes. I see you stand like greyhounds in the slips, training upon the start. The game's afoot. Follow your spirit, and upon this charge, try God for Harry! England and St. George!
Well, I remember thrilling to that when I was at school, and also thinking that it was tremendously natural. But only 35 years later, it sounds to my ear unexpectedly rhetorical. Well, at round about the same time, Edith Evans was playing Rosalind with Michael Redgrave as Orlando, and she sounds delightfully, though emphatically, musical.
Make the doors upon a woman's wit, and it will out at the casement. Shut that, and 'twill out at the keyhole. Stop that, 'twill fly with the smoke out at the chimney.
A man that had a wife with such a wit, he might say, wit with a wilt.
Nay, you might keep that check for it, till you met your wife's wit going to your neighbor's bed.
And what wit could wit have to excuse that?
Married to say she came to seek you there. You shall never take her without her answer, unless you take her without her tongue.
Well, Henry Ainley was certainly concerned with the plangent and melancholy sounds of Othello's lament over Desdemona's body when he recorded this scene from the play in 1938.
Cold, my girl, even like thy chastity. Oh, curse such slave. Whip me, ye devils, from the possession of this heavenly sight. Blow me about in winds, roast me in sulphur, wash me in steep down gulfs of liquid fire. Oh, Desdemona, Desdemona, dead. Oh, oh, oh.
Well, we may laugh. I rather suspect that would probably be very moving in the theatre, but certainly, I mean, this is just a completely different style from anything that we're used to. Well, to pursue the point back to 1906, Sir Herbert Beerbohm Tree organised the end of Mark Antony's speech, provoked by the sight of the murdered Caesar's body, by ascending in semitones up to the climax.
Blood and destruction shall be so in use, and dreadful objects so familiar, that mothers shall but smile when they behold their infants quartered with the hands of war, all pity choked with custom of fell deeds, and see the spirit ranging for revenge, with Ate by his side, come hot from hell, shall in these confines with a monarch's voice cry havoc, and let slip the dogs of war, that this foul deed shall smell above the earth with carrion men groaning for burial.
Granted that earlier generations had quite different ideas of what was natural and what was real for all kinds of social reasons. Nevertheless, I think it's fair to say that to our contemporary ears, those actors were preoccupied with the music of Shakespeare's language. And yet, Irving had this advice for the younger actor.
The most natural, the most seemingly accidental effects are obtained when the working of the mind is seen before the tongue gives it words.
And when he was talking about speaking and elocution as essential ingredients of great acting, Irving said,
"A very simple test is a reference to the records of old actors. What is it in their performances that chiefly impressed their contemporaries? Very often simple exclamations that deeply moved their auditors because it was a gleam of nature in the midst of declamation."
Well, the claims of naturalness on the one hand, as against high verbal music on the other, were argued throughout the 19th and indeed the 18th centuries. The critic George Henry Lewis, comparing Macready with Charles Keene, wrote,
Macready's declamation was mannered and unmusical, yet he never allowed you to feel, as you feel in the declamation of Charles Keene, that he was speaking words which he did not thoroughly understand.
Lewis was also an eyewitness of Edmund Keene, and he had this to say of him.
His voice was marvelously musical and had tones of a searching pathos.
This is not to say that Macready or even Charles and Edmund Keene were trying to be musical, but certainly it was in those terms that their contemporaries evaluated them. A critic wrote of David Garrick,
Garrick was no declaimer. True conception of character and natural expression of it were his distinguishing excellencies.
We can only guess at that 18th century idea of natural expression. We do know that Garrick had a wig invented for him for his performance of Macbeth, so that by pulling a thread inside his costume, it would display his hair standing on end for the frightening bits. Colley Cibber, the actor and dramatist who knew both Garrick and Betterton, the 17th century actor, believed that the voice of the singer is not more strictly tied to time and tune than that of an actor in theatrical elocution. But for all that, he praised Betterton above all other actors because of his ability to be truthful and natural when lesser actors were in love with sound at the expense of sense. So, we've traced the discussion back almost to Shakespeare himself. And perhaps Shakespeare was voicing some of his predilections as a dramatist via the character of Hamlet when he makes it clear to the players that the speaking of dramatic language is a complicated business and that the balance is very difficult to get right.
Speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue. But if you mouth it, as many of your players do, I had as lief the town crier spoke my lines. Oh, it offends me to the soul to hear a robustious, periwig-pated fellow tear a passion to tatters, to very rags, to split the ears of the groundlings who for the most part are capable of nothing but inexplicable dumb shows and noise. I'd have such a fellow whipped for a doing termagant, it out Herod's Herod. Pray you avoid it. Be not too tame, neither, but let your own discretion be your tutor. Suit the action to the word to the action, with this special observance that you o'erstep not the modesty of nature, for anything so overdone is from the purpose of playing, whose end, both at the first and now, was and is, to hold as 'twere the mirror up to nature.
Of course, we have to remember that spoken English hasn't always sounded the same as it does now. So if we could go back in a time machine and step out into the middle of an audience at the Globe in 1590, watching the great Burbage performing, it's fairly certain that we would find him quite difficult to understand. Now, John, I know that there is a lot of scholastic disagreement about this, but could you tell us how Elizabethan English is likely to have sounded?
Well, I'm no expert on it at all, but I think I can give you some sort of approximation to what it may have been like. And I'll take a bit of what you heard earlier of the Olivier speech. Once more into the breach, dear friends, once more, or close the walls up, we are English dead. In pace there's nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility, but when the blast of war blows in our air, then imitate the action of the tigger.
But John, that seems to be several modern dialects rolled into one.
Yes, it's a funny mixture of West Country, North Country, American and Irish, I would say.
It seems to have more diphthongs in it than in modern English.
Yes, the vowels are thicker and richer, and the consonants tend to be tougher and harder. For instance, just before Elizabethan English, KN in the word knight, like a knight on a horse, was still pronounced knight.
Was it a language that would be more conducive to onomatopoeia?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in the same speech that I've just quoted from, to take one line, which is, cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. The word war was war.
Dogs.
And that is onomatopoeically much more powerful.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of words like that.
It gives the lie to that commonly held belief in a lot of American academies, particularly those that are teaching acting, that in order to play Shakespeare, you have to speak it with a standard English accent with received pronunciation.
Oh, yes, I think it's arguable that American is closer to it than our received English.
Why did the Elizabethan dramatists choose to write in blank verse? Now, to break this down a bit, I suppose what we need to find out, first of all, is what kind of verse forms were used by dramatists before the Elizabethan dramatists came along. So, John, can you tell us something about earlier verse forms?
The earlier verse forms were full of doggerel and were very thumpy and didn't really approximate to real speech. If I could just read you 2 or 3 examples, you'll see that in all of them the rhythm is insistent to a degree that takes over from meaning and certainly from any sense of character. The first example is a little short one from a miracle play, which goes, all hail, both blithe and glad, for here come I, a merry lad. Pray cease your din, my master bade, or else the devil will you speed.
So how many stresses is that in the line? How many syllables, how many stresses?
An 8-syllable line with 4 stresses.
Yeah.
Here is what's called a fortina from a Tudor play called King Cambyses. Redoubted prince and mighty king, myself I prostrate here, vouchsafe, O king, with me to bear for this that I appear. With humble suit I pardon crave of your most royal grace to give me leave my mind to break before you in this place. You see, it's not speech, it's jingle, it's doggerel.
In a verse form that is as jingly as that, and therefore as difficult to make sound like real speech, are we also saying that verse like that is incapable of any complexity?
Absolutely.
Did the Elizabethan dramatists invent blank verse?
Blank verse was actually invented by the poet Surrey, and then the dramatists took it over. And it was first used in a rather academic play called Gorboduc in 1561, which is considerably before Shakespeare. And then it first got used at the end of the 1590s, and then it became the norm for all Elizabethan dramatists writing.
Why was it so convenient, and once it was found convenient, why is it that all the dramatists employed that form, and although they experimented with it, didn't branch out and use other forms and other meters?
I think the main reason is a very simple, pragmatic one, is that the rhythm of a blank verse line most closely approximates to the norms of English speech. It actually does catch the way we talk. It is quite possible to catch somebody speaking blank verse today without actually thinking it. I think the other reason why it was used was that it had an enormous mnemonic value for an actor learning his lines. The Elizabethans did many, many plays in their repertory. In fact, we have record of 1 year in an Elizabethan playhouse where the actors had to learn 43 plays in a season, which is fantastic for the demands on an actor's memory. Now, I think it's a matter of, which our actors here will comment on better than I can, but that it is easier to learn and put into your head a lot of blank verse lines where the line is spelt out for you than it is to learn a more shapeless prose.
Well, is that true, what John is saying?
Yes, absolutely. Because it's set out in a particular pattern, and you can keep a picture of that pattern in your head.
Do you keep that picture in your head all the time?
No, only in rehearsal. Yeah. Once you're into performance, its use is over.
I think it's something to do with the shortness of the lines. The most difficult playwright I find to learn is Bernard Shaw, who writes long, very rhythmic sentences, but they're long and they're complicated. And the mnemonic for Shaw is the turn of the page rather than the end of the line.
It's true, isn't it, that it's an old story in the theatre that if an actor acting blank verse dries, he will ad-lib, and he will discover afterwards that he has ad-libbed in the meter, in blank verse.
So, John, can you tell us what is a blank verse line?
Well, the easiest definition of a blank verse line is to say it's the rhythm that goes de-dum, 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 de-dum.
10 syllables, 5 stress.
10 syllables, 5 strong stresses.
Yes. I remember all too clearly when Roy Kinnear joined the Royal Shakespeare Company. He was terribly worried about this whole thing of iambic pentameters and the verse, and that he thought perhaps he was coming from a different tradition, and he therefore needed a bit of help before we had our first text rehearsal. And he said to me, so how does this blank verse go? And I said, look, it's really very, very simple, just as John has said. I said, it's da-da, 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 da-da. Ah, fine. Oh, now I understand. So just do that to me once more. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. Fine, got it. Okay. And we did some improvised rehearsals around The Taming of the Shrew, and we didn't look at the text, and each day Roy would say to me, just tell me again, da-dum, 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 da-dum. And he'd got it absolutely accurately. And then I announced that on the following day we were going to do our first text rehearsal. And very late that night my telephone rang, and it was Roy just saying, how does it go again? Da-dum, 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 da-dum. Well, he was playing Battista, and it just so happens that Battista's first line in the play is, gentlemen, importune me no further. And Roy, who'd been learning this tune, came on, and in front of the rest of the actors, he managed, God knows how, to say, gentlemen, importune me no further.
Yeah. One point there, which is to say that blank verse doesn't necessarily have anything to do with poetry. It can accommodate poetry, it can be heightened into poetic use, but the norm of blank verse is strictly practical, to do with normal human speech and not to do with poetry. I think that's important to stress.
Let's have an example of a simple, single, regularly stressed blank verse line. David.
If music be the food of love, play on.
Alan, give us another one.
In sooth, I know not why I am so sad.
Another use of the blank verse line that Shakespeare makes is to write a line that has the shadow of an extra syllable, an 11-syllable line, although still there are only 5 strong stresses, and we call that a line with a feminine ending. An example of a line with a feminine ending, Michael.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
Jane.
Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?
Ian.
Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow.
I suppose the next usage that we need to define is the couplet. 2 pentameter lines put together and they rhyme. So, Jane, give us some rhyming couplets.
Cesario, by the roses of the spring, by maidhood, honor, truth, and everything, I love thee so, that maugre all thy pride, nor wit nor reason can my passion hide.
And in the same way that the simple pentameter can have a feminine ending, also the rhyming couplet can have a feminine rhyme, so that 2 syllables are rhymed. In fact, that speech goes on into feminine rhyming couplet. Yes, how does it go on?
But rather, reason thus with reason fetter, love sought is good, but given unsought is better.
Now let's look at how blank verse is put together. I mean, let's look at a paragraph of blank verse, as it were. Patrick, speak a bit of the Gaunt speech from Richard II, and the point that I want to demonstrate is that the punctuation of the verse comes in the expected place at the end of the line. So either a comma or a full stop comes at the end of the line, which is why we call it end-stopped verse.
This royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle, this earth of majesty, this seat of Mars, this other Eden, demi-paradise, this fortress built by nature for herself against infection and the hand of war, this happy breed of men, this little world, this precious stone set in the silver sea.
Ian, I want you to take a speech from one of Shakespeare's latest plays, The Winter's Tale, written at the very end of his career. Take a speech of Leontes and do absolutely the same as Patrick has just done. That is to say, I mean, take the breath and the punctuation at the end of each pentameter line.
De-dum, 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 de-dum. Inch thick, knee deep, or head and ears a forked one. Go play, boy, play, thy mother plays, and I. Play too, but so disgraced a part whose issue will hiss me to my grave contempt and clamour. Will be my knell, go play, boy, play, there have been, or I am much deceived, cuckolds ere now.
Okay, well, that's enough to make the point that if Ian sticks rigidly to that pentameter rhythm and to the idea that the line ought to have some kind of natural stop at the end of it, then that passage doesn't make any sense. However, if Ian speaks it according to the punctuation, which is invariably in the middle of the line and not at the end of the line, so that he runs one line on into the next, then it immediately does make sense.
Inch thick, knee deep, or head and ears a forked one. Go play, boy, play. Thy mother plays, and I play too. But so disgraced a part, whose issue will hiss me to my grave. Contempt and clamour will be my knell. Go play, boy, play. There have been, or I am much deceived, cuckolds ere now.
I think it's never a very clear-cut matter with Shakespeare's late plays. The verse does run on in the way that Ian and Trevor have shown. But if I could raise another issue, it could well be that something that seems to end a line rather oddly, like here, go play, boy, play, thy mother plays, and I, end of line, play too, the beginning of another line, it could be that that is a naturalistic indication of how to play the line non-grammatically but naturalistically. So what Shakespeare may be doing is giving naturalistic hints of phrasing to the actor.
And it's often true, isn't it, even in an irregular blank verse line, that the last word of the line is frightfully important and may well need the slightest of pauses after it, even though the sense doesn't actually demand it.
I think the way I'd sum it up is to say that it's perfectly all right to break the verse line, provided that you do it knowingly. You've either got to observe the verse line, or if you do decide to run on, you must know what you're doing and you must know where the verse line is.
Let's take an example of regularly stressed iambic pentameters, but in a scene where the pentameter line is shared between two characters. Let's take an example from The Taming of the Shrew. David and Jane, if you could give us a bit of that.
Nay, come, Kate, come. You must not look so sour.
It is my fashion when I see a crab.
Why, here's no crab, and therefore look not sour.
There is, there is.
Then show it me.
Had I a glass, I would.
What do you mean, my face?
Well aimed of such a young one.
Now, by St. George, I am too young for you.
Yet you are withered.
'Tis with cares.
I care not.
Nay, hear you, Kate, in sooth you scape not, sir.
I chafe you if I tarry. Let me go.
Good. Thank you. The point that I was really trying to make is that it's the verse form as much as the characters or the content of what the characters say that contributes to the comedy. So in this particular case, Petruchio says, why, here's no crab and therefore look not sour, and Kate says, there is, then there's no completion to the end of that line. Now, it could be that Shakespeare is instructing that Kate has to spread that out. There is. Or it could be an instruction that Petruchio is really wrong-footed. There is. And he can't find a comeback. And when he does get it, then show it me. Had I a glass, I would. She's already beaten him to the end of the line. What should be my well aimed of such a young one? She's beaten him again. It seems that there is an instruction contained in the verse about cueing and some kind of indication about how the comedy works. Let's do a scene from Love's Labour's Lost. Let's have Michael as Barone, Jane as Rosaline, and take it from This Jest is Dry to Me.
This jest is dry to me, my gentle sweet. Your wit makes wise things foolish. When we greet with eyes best seeing heaven's fiery eye, by light we lose light. Your capacity is of that nature that to your huge store wise things seem foolish and rich things but poor.
This proves you wise and rich, for in my eye
I am a fool and full of poverty.
But that you take what doth to you belong, it were a fault to snatch words from my tongue.
Oh, I am yours and all that I possess.
All the fool mine.
I cannot give you less.
Yeah. Good. And there again, I mean, the same comment that we were making about the passage from The Taming of the Shrew is true, but it's just got that much more dazzle and brilliance because one character is serving up a rhyme and the other one's got to meet it with the rhyme word.
There's also something else. When you're playing a half line
with another actor, you've got to be very disciplined that you come in just at the end and right on cue without overlapping. There's a wonderful example, actually, in King John, Pat, where the king is talking to Hubert about committing a murder. And it goes something like this. We'll demonstrate.
Death.
My lord?
A grave.
He shall not live.
Enough.
One line.
Blank verse is often implicit stage direction to the actor by Shakespeare. That if a blank verse line, as we've seen, is shared between two characters, there's a strong indication that the second half of the line has to be picked up as a quick cue by the second speaker.
There's an instance where that applies, and it's Shakespeare perhaps giving you a stage direction about an action. In The Midsummer Night's Dream, there comes a point when any director and any actor playing Puck has got to decide how he gets off after he's said, "I'll put a girdle round about the earth in 40 minutes. You've got a number of choices. Last time we performed it, we rehearsed it, we tried many different ways. You can either try to get the man off in the way he describes, very, very quickly, or else you can play against that and get him plodding off very slowly and get yourself a cheap laugh. Or else you can follow the demands of the verse, because Puck's speech ends with a half line. I'll put a girdle round about the earth in 40 minutes. That line is finished by Oberon, who says, having once this juice. Now, if Oberon picks that cue up and perhaps also does an action which attracts the audience's attention, I think it's quite possible for Puck to go off without the audience having seen him.
So the verse solves the problem?
The verse solves the problem.
Yeah.
Or a trapeze does.
On occasion. Yes.
We haven't really made the most important point about the way Shakespeare uses blank verse. Because when I said de-dum, 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 I meant that was the norm of a blank verse line. But the way Shakespeare uses the verse form is to set up that norm and then significantly break it by stress in the offbeat position, i.e. in friends, Romans, countrymen. It's not de-dum, de-dum, it's friends, Romans, countrymen. The extra kick of friends in the contrapuntal offbeat position helps Antony to grasp his audience and say, friends, listen to me. Oh. Or in the line I quoted earlier, once more into the breach, dear friends. That's an irregularly stressed line. Once more into the breach, dear friends, once more. You can hear Henry pleading, reaching out to the soldiers in those extra stresses. And it's actually those counter stresses, it's those breaks to the norm, which really is the nitty-gritty of what we're talking about.
Terry and Alan, you two were involved in doing a production of Henry V, and you also did the trilogy of 3 early history plays, the Henry VI plays. Can you tell us something about the differences between very early Shakespeare and sort of middle period Shakespeare by comparing your experience of those two different productions?
If we take in Henry VI Part 3 initially, Henry VI's soliloquy in the middle of one of the innumerable big battles, where he talks about his own emotional involvement and yet his own desire to distance himself. What we start off with is very much a feeling, and we'll do it in a minute and you'll be able to see what I mean, of that medieval poetry that John was talking about, the kind of regularity of the rhythm. It is mainly end-stop lines. There's only a couple of feminine endings. It's very, very strongly verse as verse. The sense of balance of one side of the sentence against the other. These are all medieval qualities, though, of course, already he's taking it very, very, very much further.
O God, methinks it were a happy life to be no better than a homely swain, to sit upon a hill as I do now, to carve out dials quaintly, point by point, thereby to see the minutes, how they run. How many makes the hour full complete? How many hours bring about the day? How many days will finish up the year? How many years a mortal man may live? When this is known, then to divide the times. So many hours must I tend my flock. So many hours must I take my rest. So many hours must I contemplate. So many hours must I sport myself. So many days my ewes have been with young. So many weeks ere the poor fools will e'en. So many years ere I shall share the fleece. So minutes, Hours, days, weeks, months, and years passed over to the end they were created, would bring white hairs unto a quiet grave.
We wanted to just show you one other one, which is from Henry V. Although this is all written out as a kind of verse, in fact, there are sections of it, which you will hear, which are, to all intents and purposes, prose, which break in within it. The punctuation is now in the centre of the lines, very much more than it is at the end.
What infinite heart's ease must kings neglect that private men enjoy? And what have kings that privates have not too, save ceremony, general ceremony? And what art thou, thou idle ceremony? What kind of God art thou that sufferest more of mortal griefs than do thy worshippers? What are thy rents? What are thy comings in? O ceremony, show me but thy worth. What is thy soul of adoration? Art thou aught else but place, degree, and form, creating awe and fear in other men, wherein thou art less happy being feared than they in fearing? What drink'st thou oft instead of homage sweet, but poisoned flattery? Oh, be sick, great greatness, and bid thy ceremony give thee cure. Think'st thou the fiery fever will go out with titles blown from adulation? Will it give place to flexure and low bending? Canst thou, when thou command'st the beggar's knee, command the health of it?
We're beginning to uncover one of the all-important central points. Shakespeare wrote 37 plays, which is a prolific output by any standards. 37 plays in a writing lifetime, which is generally agreed to have been little more than 20 years in duration. And the range is gigantic, from the ritualistic through to heightened naturalism. The range is so great that it defies any generalizations about how the verse should be spoken. There's no single or simple rule of thumb. There's so many different kinds of Shakespeare as to defeat all preconceptions of an authentic Shakespeare sound or of a Shakespeare music. Granted that there isn't one general problem of verse speaking, but thousands of different detailed problems. How do we set about revealing and communicating to an audience all that we suspect in rehearsal or in the study to be present in a Shakespeare text? How do we communicate that in a performance? We found, very much under John's tutelage, that the Shakespeare sonnets provide excellent instruction and present many of the most difficult language problems that we find in the plays in microcosm. A sonnet, 14 lines of iambic pentameters, with a complicated rhyming structure, ending up in a rhyming couplet. So, David Suchet, I'd like you just to speak it through, and then we'll talk about it once we know what it is that we're discussing.
When my love swears that she is made of truth, I do believe her, though I know she lies, that she might think me some untutored youth, unlearned in the world's false subtleties. Thus vainly thinking that she thinks me young, although she knows my days are past my best. Simply I credit her false-speaking tongue. On both sides thus is simple truth suppressed. But wherefore says she not she is unjust, and wherefore say not I that I am old? Oh, love's best habit is in seeming trust, and age in love loves not to have years told. Therefore I lie with her, and she with me, and in our faults by lies we flattered be.
Good. I asked you just to read that through. And of course I was being unfair to you because I was denying you any possibility of dramatic situation thereby. And it seems to me that the most important thing about this sonnet, and about many of the sonnets, that they are like little plays, or like a soliloquy, that it's a person in a dramatic situation, and therefore a person needing to talk, needing to communicate, and that there's some kind of development in this little play from beginning to end. And therefore, what I want us to decide on is the dramatic situation that this man is in. So let's invent one. Let's imagine, well, let's use something like the situation that we've got here, that you are a university lecturer, a Don, and that your age is the wrong side of 50. And surrounding you at the moment are your students, and you've been delivering yourself of a lecture about the nature of truth, and a lot of people are beginning to question your stand on this subject, that you're being just a little bit equivocal, and people are wanting you to be more absolute than you've been in your lecture, and therefore confronting a whole series of faces. And if we use that very strong dramatic situation, then it seems to me that what we'll begin to get hold of is the sense of humor of it. That time and time again words are used with double meanings, words are used ironically, words are used in order to get that glint of response.
When my love swears that she is made of truth, I do believe her, though I know she lies. That she might think me some untutored youth, unlearned in the world's false subtleties. Thus vainly thinking that she thinks me young, although she knows my days are past my best. Simply I credit her false speaking tongue. On both sides thus is simple truth suppressed.
Good. Let's stop at the end of those 4 lines.
I wish I was a university doctor.
But now we're into a section where words are being used with 2 meanings. You see, he says, thus, vainly thinking. Now, in the first sense, of course, he means it is in vain for me to think that I am young, or to allow her to think that I'm young, because I'm not. It is in vain. It is hopeless. The other meaning of vain is the sense of vanity. I'm allowing myself a little vanity that she should think me younger than I am. So the double meaning there. Although she knows my days are past the best, you tend to say my best,
I do, don't
which is even more insulting to yourself. But it's like, I mean, that phrase, past the best, is very colloquial. It's, you know, it's almost like, again, you're using a phrase that they might have used because it's a heartless phrase. The next double meaning, simply I credit her false speaking tongue. Simply, in the sense of straightforwardly, but also simply in the sense of naively, simple-mindedly, I mean innocently, I credit. So again, there are 2 meanings. And since all the time what you're talking about is truth and love, for you to show your audience that you're being treacherous with words, and did I mean that or did I mean that, is very, very appropriate to your theme. Just take the second 4 lines.
Thus vainly thinking that she thinks me young, although she knows my days are past the best, simply I credit her false speaking tongue. On both sides thus is simple truth suppressed.
And that's really your clincher, on both sides.
Actually, the simple, simply simple.
We've got, yes, that's right. So
simply
you pick up the echo of simple truth, the thing that we are having this discussion about. But why that last line of the first 8 lines is very, very strong is that we now have a situation where on 2 sides there are lies going on.
On both sides.
She's telling lies to me, and I'm allowing her to tell lies, therefore I'm telling lies to myself. So on both sides now is simple truth, and that verb, suppressed.
Yes.
Suppressed. It's a very dramatic word, and it's the rhyming word. Comes at the end of that section. So just take those 4 lines again.
Thus vainly thinking that she thinks me young, although she knows my days are past the best. Simply, I credit her false-speaking tongue. On both sides thus is simple truth suppressed. But wherefore says she not she is unjust? And wherefore say not I that I am old? Oh, love's best habit is in seeming trust. An age in love loves not to have years told.
And still the double meanings go on. Love's best habit is in seeming trust. So habit in one sense means apparel, and in another sense means that which is habitual.
Yes.
And you can talk about that which is habitual because you're over your 50th birthday. I mean, and there again, there's a sense of humour because of the ambiguity of the word. And age in love, loves not. I mean, the repeat of the word love is deliberate and just needs to be used by you.
Right.
Put into inverted commas. And then on into that final couplet, where, again, we have more double meanings. Therefore, I lie with her, and she with me. And, of course, there is the double meaning of we're telling lies to each other, we're also lying in bed together. So by now, your audience is well and truly mocked, though hopefully on your side, because you've proved a point. Curiously, the last line is very simple. That there aren't double meanings in the words, but just the simple, unexpected inversion that instead of people being dishonoured by their faults, in this particular case, here are 2 people who are flattered by their faults. I think probably it's time to take the whole thing through.
When my love swears that she is made of truth, I do believe her, though I know she lies. That she might think me some untutored youth, unlearned in the world's false subtleties. Thus, vainly thinking that she thinks me young, although she knows my days are past the best, simply, I credit her false-speaking tongue. On both sides, thus, is simple truth suppressed. But wherefore says she not she is unjust, and wherefore say not I that I am old? Oh, love's best habit is in seeming trust, and age in love loves not to have years told. Therefore I lie with her, and she with me, and in our faults by lies we flattered be.
Well, that's part 1, and in next week, in part 2, it broadens out to show the Royal Shakespeare Company at work on specific scenes from the plays. Till then, good night. Last week, here in our studios, we showed the first part of a Shakespeare Masterclass with the Royal Shakespeare Company. They came into these studios to work through a production that we've been organising from the South Bank Show for the last 6 months. It's an attempt to show how the major Shakespearean company in the world tackles the texts of plays which are at once the most persistently performed and often popularly ignored. Trevor Nunn and his colleagues gave a brief history of the performance of Shakespeare and worked on various passages, including the sonnets. This week, the story moves on to the plays themselves, as the masterclass turns the training into acting.
The best way of demonstrating the Royal Shakespeare Company's approach to Shakespeare's language, and I want to stress that it is only an approach, which probably has only the value of coherence, is for us to do some work here and now. And the passage that John Barton is going to talk about and work on comes from Troilus and Cressida. It's Act 4, Scene 5, when all the legendary Greek generals take turns to introduce themselves to the Trojan champion Hector. John.
The point I want to bring out is really how the verse helps to characterize the different Greek generals, because each encounter has a different kind of verse, which is an acting clue to what you are. Now, what I'd like to do is to just start off by doing each bit and then talking about it. So, David, if you read Agamemnon, who's the commander-in-chief, without any comment from me, to Michael as Hector, welcoming him.
Worthy of arms, as welcome as to one that would be rid of such an enemy. But that's no welcome. Understand more clear. What's past and what's to come is strewed with husks and formless ruin of oblivion. But in this extant moment, faith and troth, strained purely from all hollow bias drawing, bids thee with most divine integrity, from heart of very heart, great Hector, welcome.
I thank thee, most imperious Agamemnon.
I suppose the main general point I would make is that the language of this is obviously pompous because Agamemnon is pompous, and it is deliberately rather formal against the greater humanity of Nestor and the others that follow. So I think that you want to relish the pomposity rather than try to be too naturalistic with it. Just point out one or two things that the verse does. Worthy of arms, a good contrapuntal stress at the beginning. Give him a good welcome with worthy. He's worthy. Right. Really hit that. As welcome as to one, end of line, and then feel for the next line. There's a good naturalistic pause in the verse there. As welcome as to one, how shall I put it, that would be rid of such an enemy. That's a little joke that the commander-in-chief is making. Of course, I'd rather you were dead, old boy. Yeah. But actually coin that. but use the verse ending there on as welcome as to one, end of line. I think that the rich, pompous language needs to be found more. What you're doing is treating it too much as naturalistic language. Yeah. But he himself consciously coins that phrase, is strewed with husks and formless ruin of oblivion. And he's very pleased with himself for those phrases. So do it again with more pomp, more pompousness, and coin it more. Okay.
Worthy of arms, as welcome as to one that would be rid of such an enemy. But that's no welcome. Understand more clear, what's past and what's to come is strewed with husks and formless ruin of oblivion. But in this extant moment, faith and troth, strained purely from all hollow bias drawing, bids thee with most divine integrity, from heart of very heart, great Hector, welcome.
I thank thee, most imperious Agamemnon.
Very good. Good. Now let's go on now to Nestor. Let's do the same with Nestor's speech. The second speech is Nestor, the oldest of the Greek generals.
But it played by the youngest of the English actors.
Great character. I have, thou gallant Trojan, seen thee oft, labouring for destiny, make cruel way through ranks of Greekish youth. And I have seen thee, as hot as Perseus, spur thy Phrygian steed, despising many forfeits and subduments, when thou hast hung thy advanced sword in the air, not letting it decline on the decline, that I have said to some my standers by, lo, Jupiter is yonder, dealing life. And I have seen thee pause and take thy breath when that a ring of Greeks have hemmed thee in like an Olympian wrestling. This have I seen, but this thy countenance, still locked in steel, I never saw till now. I knew thy grandsire, and once fought with him. He was a soldier good, and by great Mars, the captain of us all. Never like thee. Let an old man embrace thee, and worthy warrior, welcome to our tents.
'Tis old Nestor.
Let me embrace the good old chronicle.
Not again.
That hast so long walked hand in hand with time. Most reverend Nestor, I'm glad to clasp thee.
I would my arms could match thee. I would my arms could match thee in contention as they contend with thee in courtesy.
I would they could.
By this white beard I'd fight with thee tomorrow. Well, welcome, welcome. I have seen the time when with my little arm.
Let's just go back on that. Now, in the general attitude to Hector, you should be more romantic about him, because you think he is the most chivalric, noble hero you have ever seen.
Yes.
And therefore, have more wonder about him, have more reverence for him, and be, I say, basically more romantic. In the sequence of meetings, the tone of this speech is essentially, I think, romantic. His is pompous. The one we're going to hear in a moment from Ulysses is more ironic and cynical and worldly. But basically, you're romantic, and basically you're gentle towards him, as opposed to the brutalness that we see in a minute from Achilles. I think that
there is something, isn't there, about the way that the sentence runs on and on and on.
I thought what was marvellous
and little parentheses.
What you did get absolutely right is you made it all flow on, because it's written that way, because the point is he is very loquacious, he does go on. Agamemnon is pompous. In this case, this is clearly the characterization of a loquacious man. And it's got to pour out of him, which I think you were doing, which was smashing. I just say, look for the different colours of the language, of where the language is very simple and human and direct, and where it's a bit of a metaphor or coloured or heightened. Because some of the time, he speaks very, very simply, doesn't he? But by great Mars, the captain of us all, never like thee. Let an old man embrace thee, and worthy warrior, welcome to our tents. It's very simple. At other times, it's heightened. I have seen thee as hot as Perseus spur his Phrygian steed. I think you want to make a bigger differentiation between the coined language, the heightened language, and the naturalistic language. And let me make one point on the second page, when you say, I would my arms could match thee in contention as they contend with thee in courtesy. You need to point the antithetical words there for it to be clear. I would my arms could match thee in contention as they contend with thee in courtesy. I mean, that's a very important Shakespeare text point that we haven't made, that there are many sentences where unless you hit the antithetical word, it's actually obscure in meaning to follow, whereas if you hit the antithesis there, it is actually clear. Just do those two lines.
Yes. I would my arms could match thee in contention as they contend with thee in courtesy.
Good. Now, A, that is clear. B, that was good in character terms, because Nestor was pleased with his own antithesis.
Yes.
And Nestor is consciously an orator. I think what you caught absolutely there, and I think, now let's go over the long bit and do the whole section again, is that Nestor is conscious as he does it that he is the best speaker in the world and is good at coining words and good at poetry and good at verbal compliments. Okay.
I have, thou gallant Trojan, seen thee oft labouring for destiny, make cruel way through ranks of Greekish youth, and I have seen thee, as hot as Perseus, spur thy Phrygian steed, despising many forfeits and subduements, when thou hast hung thy advanced sword in the air, not letting it decline on the declined, that I have said to some my standers by, lo, Jupiter is yonder, dealing life. And I've seen thee pause and take thy breath when there a ring of Greeks have hemmed thee in like an Olympian wrestling. This have I seen, but this, thy countenance, still locked in steel, I never saw till now. I knew thy grandsire, and once fought with him. He was a soldier good, but by great Mars, the captain of us all, never like thee. Let an old man embrace thee, and worthy warrior, welcome to our tents.
'Tis the old Nestor. Let me embrace thee, good old chronicle, that hast so long walked hand in hand with time. Most reverend Nestor, I am glad to clasp thee.
I would my arms could match thee in contention, as they contend with thee in courtesy.
I would they could.
By this white beard I'd fight with thee tomorrow. Well, welcome, welcome. I've seen the time.
I wonder now. Wait for the laugh.
Well, that's a good point to stop. I thought you took up the points marvellously. Absolutely smashingly. And what we've got to look for now is the contrast in tone of when Ulysses speaks. I actually think that it's necessary that I have seen the time is a dissolve to get you out of the scene so he can cut in clean rather than it's a laugh line. Surely do it gently, dreamily. Just, you finish welcoming him and you wander off saying...
There's something about, welcome, as if the tears are beginning to come and they...
Oh, I've lived. But go away into your own dream world and then leave it open to Patrick. And then if you come in now as Ulysses and be consciously cutting into the courtesy and the chivalry and the gentleness which we've just had from Nestor.
Well, is it, in fact, an interruption? Do I cut across him? Is he going to say more if I don't say that line?
No. I think that you know that Nestor can never be interrupted. You let Nestor talk himself out and then go on. Yes, take it from hard by this white beard I'd fight with thee tomorrow.
By this white beard I'd fight with thee tomorrow. Well, welcome. I've seen the time.
I wonder now how yonder city stands when we have here her base and pillar by us.
I know your favour, Lord Ulysses, well. Ah, sir, there's many a Greek and Trojan dead, since first I saw yourself and Diomed and Ilion on your Greekish embassy.
Sir, I'd foretold you then what would ensue. My prophecy is but half his journey yet. For yonder walls that pertly front your town, yon towers whose wanton tops do bust the clouds, must kiss their own feet.
I must not believe you. There they stand yet. And modestly, I think, the fall of every Phrygian stone will cost a drop of Grecian blood. The end crowns all. And that old common arbitrator, time, will one day end it.
So to him we leave it. Most gentle and most valiant Hector, welcome. After the general, I beseech you next to feast with me and see me at my tent.
Right, good, thank you. The main point I'd like to go for here is, it seems to me, a superb example of Shakespeare using a packed, extra-stressed, contrapuntal, extra-stressing of key words to give extra weight to what is being said. For instance, the first thing that Hector says, I know your favour, Lord Ulysses, well. Every syllable of that line is stressed. It's actually a 10 stress, not a 5 stress line. So it's saying, right, I know you, don't I? There's a sort of measuring up to him. But you really need to stress that line with all those stresses. It's wonderful, the extra stress. By the way, on the first thing Ulysses says, I think you ought to coin base and pillar because that's a metaphor. You said it straight as a naturalistic statement as if he was a base and pillar.
Yeah.
But it's actually sending him up, the base and the pillar. It's in inverted commas and mocking him. Then, ah, sir, there's many a Greek and Trojan dead since first I saw yourself and Diamond. There's 2 regular verse lines in Ilion on your Greekish embassy. It goes on quite regularly. Coin more Greekish, because that's...
Greekish
is a derogatory word for Greek, isn't it? So you've got to relish that ish of Greekish more. Then Ulysses does exactly what Hector does. Sir, I foretold you then what would ensue. That is a very strongly stressed line, isn't it? It's not 10 strong stresses, but sir is a strong stress, I is a strong stress, foretold is 2 strong stresses. So it's saying, I warned you what was going to happen. But in the verse, this extra strong stressing embodies the way the 2 men are measuring up one to another.
Yes.
My prophecy is but half his journey yet, for yonder walls that pertly front your town, regular lines. Yond towers, extra stress, those towers, whose wanton tops do bust the clouds again, not naturalistic, but coin it. It's a metaphor. And then again, a strongly stressed line, or half line, must kiss their own feet. All those are strongly stressed words, aren't they? So you're saying they are going to fall, I'm telling you.
There's an inevitability about it.
That's right, absolutely inevitable. Goes strongly stressed again, doesn't it, on the end crowns all, de dum dum dum. And that, O common arbitrator time, and here it happens again, will one day end it. Monosyllabic, strongly stressed, deliberate. And as always, as I always say, the most important word in Shakespeare is the word time. It's got a capital letter here. And that old common arbitrator, what put into time all your feelings about mortality, death, decay, and also your love for the city. And then, so to him we leave it, undercuts, will one day end it, doesn't it? There's a shared verse line. So you pick up the cue quickly and undercut him there. And then there are 3 quite simple, unpretentious lines. What's nice at the end of it is that Ulysses, who's been needling and stressing, has 3 lines of simple courtesy, which are very easy in the verse room. Let's do that section again, yeah. And I wonder now how yonder city stands.
I wonder now how yonder city stands when we have here her base and pillar by us.
I know your favour, Lord Ulysses, well. Ah, sir, there's many a Greek and Trojan dead since first I saw yourself and Diomed in Ilion on your Greekish embassy.
Sir, I foretold you then what would ensue. My prophecy is but half his journey yet. For yonder walls that pertly front your town, yond towers, whose wanton tops do bust the clouds, must kiss their own feet.
I must not believe you. There they stand yet. And modestly I think the fall of every Phrygian stone will cost a drop of Grecian blood. The end crowns all. And that old common arbitrator, time, will one day end it.
So, to him we leave it. Most gentle and most valiant Hector, welcome. After the general, I beseech you next to feast with me and see me at my tent.
I shall forestall thee, Lord Ulysses. Stop! Now, Hector, I've fed mine eyes on thee. I have with exact view perused thee, Hector, and quoted joint by joint.
Is this Achilles?
I am Achilles.
Stand fair, I pray thee. Let me look on thee.
Behold thy fill.
Nay, I have done already.
But too brief. I will the second time, as I would by thee, view thee limb by limb.
Or like a book of sport, thou'lt read me o'er. But there's more in me than thou understandst. Why dost thou so oppress me with thine eye?
Tell me, you heavens, in which part of his body shall I destroy? Whether there, or there, or there, that I may give the local wound a name and make distinct the very breach whereout Hector's great spirit flew. Answer me, heavens.
It would discredit the blessed gods, proud man, to answer such a question. Stand again. Think'st thou to catch my life so pleasantly as to prenominate in nice conjecture where thou wilt hit me dead?
I tell thee, yea.
Wert thou an oracle to tell me so, I'd not believe thee. Henceforth, guard thee well, for I'll not kill thee there, nor there, nor there. But by the forge that stithed Mars his helm, I'll kill thee everywhere. Yea, o'er and o'er.
Very good. Well, I thought you did that very well indeed. I haven't very much to say about it.
Find something, John.
We could try and find something, but I mean, I think you're on to most of the things that are going on in the verse there, though I think perhaps one or two could go a bit further. I think that there are one or two strongly stressed lines of the sort we've just seen with Ulysses and Hector, like, look at Achilles' first line, I shall forestall thee, Lord Ulysses, thou, which Alan actually rightly did stress very strongly. I think the point what you both need to look at is when you've got such a charge-packed, overstressed line, is getting a bit more surge into the rhythm where the verse does flow on regularly. You see, sometimes it's deliberate, but where the verse is regular, it seemed to me that you could flow a little bit more. I mean, to take an example of Hector's, it would discredit the blessed gods, proud man, to answer such a question, stand again. To answer such a question, stand again, run that on. There's no value in a pause there, and it's a regular verse line. Because if you take, to answer such a question, stand again, quickly and tight together as a verse line, you then can get the extra kick in the next line, think'st thou to catch my life so presently. But the point I'm making is that where Shakespeare uses these extra strong stresses, he varies it as well with quite regular rhythmic lines. And it just seemed to me for both of you that where the lines were relatively simple lines, you could let it flow that much more. Let me just make one other point, always worth making about a bit of Shakespeare text, that you particularly need to relish and coin the verbs. The verbs are great here. Now, Hector, I have fed mine eyes on thee. I have with exact view perused thee, Hector, and quoted. There's a great kick in those three verbs. You quite rightly scanned it exact rather than exact. And I think it's good to do that, not only because it's right, but because it gives extra kick to the word. It's more insulting, it's more brutal. As I would buy thee, an insulting verb again you use. And above all, in which part of his body shall I destroy? That's the key word, isn't it? Any points that either of you think?
It's interesting that when Hector says, is this Achilles first, which is completing the line and quoted joint by joint, Achilles says, I am Achilles,
yes.
And there's the pause to complete the line, which Hector is courteous enough to allow him before he says, stand fair, I pray thee, let me look on thee. But the second time Achilles speaks, behold thy fill, Hector immediately says, now I've done already, and completes the line.
I think that's a smashing example of what we were talking about earlier, about where sometimes a cue is picked up quickly in the middle of a verse line, and sometimes Shakespeare's inbuilt a pause. So if we look at it from, and quoted joint by joint, pick up the cue quickly, is this Achilles? I am Achilles, pause, because that's all the verse line consists of, I am Achilles. Stand fair, I pray thee, let me look on thee. Behold thy fill, nay, I have done already. picking it up quickly to undercut Achilles. Good. Well, shall we take it through again, Pat?
Most gentle and most valiant, Hector, welcome. After the general, I beseech you next to feast with me and see me at my tent.
I shall forestall thee, Lord Ulysses. Thou! Now, Hector, I have fed mine eyes on thee. I have with exact view perused thee, Hector, and quoted joint by joint.
Is this Achilles?
I am Achilles.
Stand fair, I pray thee. Let me look on thee.
Behold thy filth.
Nay, I have done already.
Thou art too brief. I will the second time, as I would by thee, view thee limb by limb.
Oh, like a book of sport, thou'lt read me o'er. But there's more in me than thou understandst. Why dost thou so oppress me with thine eye?
Tell me, you heavens, in which part of his body shall I destroy him? Whether there, or there, or there, that I may give the local wound a name, and make distinct the very breach whereout Hector's great spirit flew. Answer me, heavens!
It would discredit the blessed gods, proud man, to answer such a question. Stand again. Think'st thou to catch my life so pleasantly as to prenominate in nice conjecture where thou wilt hit me dead?
I tell thee, yea.
Wert thou an oracle to tell me so, I'd not believe thee. Henceforth, guard thee well. But I'll not kill thee there, nor there, nor there. But by the forge that stithied Mars his helm, I'll kill thee everywhere, yea, o'er and o'er.
Excellent. Very good.
As we said at the beginning, verse speaking is no more than a department of acting and not an alternative to it. And the rules and exceptions that we've been talking about should, in the ideal world, support the actor, provide the platform from which his imagination can take off and be free. Indeed, it's my view that Shakespeare's plays have always been the most illuminated by the spontaneous inspiration of great actors rather than the discoveries of the scholars. Illuminated by the inexplicable and the eccentric in great acting. And it's my view that the plays work best when the audience have the sensation that the words are being spoken for the very first time, that they're being invented by the character who's speaking them in that situation, and that as we're watching the plot unfold and the words unfold, we have that uneasy sensation that anything could happen. I've asked Ian if he will take us through the experience of speaking Shakespeare soliloquy, of acting a Shakespeare soliloquy in a performance, so that we get some idea of the kinds of thoughts and images that are going through the actor's mind. In fact, I've asked him, as it were, to put the camera into the racing car and to take us for one lap round the circuit. Ian.
If this workshop's done anything, I hope it's scotched the, in my view, wrong belief that Shakespeare's verse is music and all you have to find out is the tune and everything will be all right. Rather, I believe that if you look after the sense, the sounds will look after themselves. I saw Maurizio Pollini play a late Beethoven sonata recently, and I had a strange feeling for about 5 miraculous seconds that I didn't know whether he was putting the music into the piano or whether he was taking it out of the piano. And acting at its best, Shakespeare, I think, is of that nature, that the actor is the playwright and the character simultaneously. This can only be achieved by the actor having total awareness of all the complexities of Shakespeare. So if we take a speech like Macbeth's last soliloquy, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, which, to crudely summarize, is a description of total blackness, total despair, that life is finite. It isn't enough just to say that and put that quality of despair into the voice and just hope it and just follow the rhythms. You've got to do many more things as well. You have to think and have analysed in rehearsal totally, so that your imagination, being fed by the concrete metaphors, concrete images, pictures, can then feed through into the body, into gesture, into timbre of voice, into eyelids, into every part of the actor's makeup. So that it does seem, as Trevor just said, that he is making it up as he goes along, although the actor, of course, knows that he isn't. But to start at the top with the first line, and I'll try as far as possible to relate this to blank verse, but it would be impossible for me not to mention imagery and all sorts of other literary devices which we haven't been talking about generally today. Satan says to Macbeth, "The Queen, my lord, is dead." And Macbeth replies, "She should have died hereafter," which is a short line. She should have died hereafter, indicating that there should be a pause, I think. And during that pause in performance, with the audience rather around me as you are now, I used to take that advantage of that pause to catch the audience's eye and begin the soliloquy, which is Macbeth, me, the actor, talking directly, sharing my thoughts with you, the audience. Hereafter introduces one element of time, the future. Then we get a regular blank verse line. There would have been a time for such a word. Didum, 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 didum. There would have been a time, stressed, time, this speech is about time, for such a word. Word is the last line. What word? Is it she, the Queen? Is it hereafter? Is it time? There's something about that line which trips, in Hamlet's words, tick-tocks like a clock. There would have been a time for such a word. It's leading on to the next line, and here comes the word which is important, tomorrow. And tomorrow. And tomorrow. There are only two words in that line, an irregular line, given weight by its repetition 3 times, and the tripping of there would have been a time for such a word slows down on tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow. The rhythm is important. It's also a nonsense word if you say it 3 times, or if you say it 20 times, like a kid skipping tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, 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 tomorrow. What does that word mean, tomorrow? It's beginning to have the lack of meaning, I think, that Macbeth detects in his own life at this point. Creeps in this petty pace from day to day. And here comes the first metaphor, the first image. And the rhythm is beginning to creep, is beginning to plod, like someone plodding along a country lane. It's footsteps now, not the tick-tock of a clock. Creeps in this petty pace from day to day. Well, we've had tomorrow. We've now got today at the end of the line. From day to day, but it leads on to the next line to, not day, but the last syllable of recorded time, and it slows up even more, ending up with a very important word, time, at the end of the sentence. Syllabel. I wonder if bell isn't the bell of a clock which records time. Then we get a regular line, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools. Yesterday. We've had tomorrow, we've had today, we've now got yesterday. We've got the whole complex of time. Macbeth is not just talking about himself, he's talking about eternity and going to say something about it. All our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. And that's where the sentence ends, in the middle of the next line. But one has to carry on and speak it as a line and a half. All our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. What is the image there that I must have clearly in my mind so that I can get the right emotion of despair? It's what? It's a fool walking along a dusty path, plodding, creeping with petty pace. A fool is what? A village idiot? Wandering along a country lane with, what, a guttering candle? I don't know, a lantern? Fool is a pun, of course. Fools, like Lear's fool, Feste, in Twelfth Night, are professional entertainers. That will be relevant in a moment, and I have to contain in my mind, as I say the word fool, that it is a pun. See two sorts of fools. That line is completed with the shock of the harsh rhythm of out, out, brief candle. The fool's candle has caught a gust of wind and is blown out, and he collapses into a dusty death in the unmade road of Elizabethan England. The last candle or light we saw in the play is Lady Macbeth's candle, which she was carrying in her sleepwalking scene, and she is dead. It's Lady Macbeth's death which is being talked about in the speech. It is the fool's death, village idiot's death. It's going to be Macbeth's death. It's going to be everybody's death. It's at this time, about this time that Shakespeare wrote Macbeth, that candles were being used in indoor theatres. And that may be relevant too when we get on to the next line, which is, life's but a walking shadow. Walking gentleman is a phrase we still use in the theatre, meaning someone who is available in any company to walk on and play a meagre part. He's the lowliest member of a company. But life is not even a walking gentleman, he's a walking shadow, less than even the meanest player. And the line is completed by a poor player. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage. And although Macbeth is talking about time, about life, Shakespeare is making those vasty concepts very concrete, very particular, not just to Macbeth himself, but to the actor who is playing Macbeth, because we're now talking about players and the audience who know they are an audience, know that McKellen playing Macbeth is an actor. They are beginning to be drawn into Macbeth's dilemma as Macbeth relates it to a player, to an actor. That's a regular line that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and we're reminded perhaps of the King Cambyses and Marlovian regular verse and people who do stamp out the rhythm as they parade. That struts and frets his hour, a concept of time, upon the stage, and then is heard no more. End of sentence, end of thought. Middle of the line, however. It is a tale told by an idiot. Idiot reaches back into the fool who was walking along the country lane with a candle that went out. Full of sound and fury, end of line. And the last line is signifying nothing. And the beats of the rest of that pentameter are not there, because the end of the speech is total silence, total oblivion, total emptiness. So much one could say about it, but just let me run through the last words of each line, and you will see that they add up to what the speech is all about. Hereafter, word, tomorrow, today, time, fools, candle, player, stage, tale, fury, nothing. I must have all that in my mind as I'm going through it. Not so that you, the audience, can understand those complexities, because I'm not giving a lecture. I think the poetry and the rhythm and all those devices that Shakespeare uses are not for the audience's benefit, they are for the actors, so that having absorbed them into his heart and his mind, he can then express them with all the other things at his command, which are his body, his facial expression, and if the production is working well, the way the production is blocked, is arranged, the way the scenery is painted, and the way the lights are lit. The crowd?
The Queen, my lord, is dead.
She should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word. Tomorrow. And tomorrow. And tomorrow. Creeps in this petty pace from day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life is but a walking shadow. A poor player that struts and frets his hour up on the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
Well, we've been talking about what happens to verse speaking when we actually get into performance. And of course we know that for lots of people, the first and sometimes the only contact that they have with Shakespeare is via the purple passages that are taught in schools and often quoted. And of course, the point is that those purple passages are all integrally part of the plays from which they've been extrapolated. And although there might be in the purple speech a quantity of imagery and of highly coloured language that's made it famous, of course there are also demands of character and of meaning within the given scene. Now, Pat Stewart, he's played Enobarbus twice in the last few years. And it's Enobarbus who has the very famous description of the meeting between Antony and Cleopatra on the river of Cydnus. Now, Patrick, first of all, did it in 1973 and is also currently playing the part. So, Patrick, here's how you did it in 1973.
I'll tell you. The barge she sat in, like a burnished throne, burned on the water. The poop was beaten gold, purple sails, and so perfumed that the winds were lovesick with them. The oars were silver, which to the tune of flutes kept stroke, and made the water which they beat to follow faster as amorous of their strokes. For her own person, it beggared all description. She did lie in her pavilion, cloth of gold of tissue, or picturing that Venus where we see the fancy outwork nature. On each side her stood pretty dimpled boys, like smiling cupids with divers coloured fans, whose wind did seem to glow the delicate cheeks which they did cool, and what they undid, did.
Do you feel differently about it? Or are you doing different things with the speech?
Yes. Quicker. First of all, I'd like to know who that good-looking young fellow was. Yes, very much quicker now. And after a gap of 6 years, that's what alarms me most, to see how each image, each adjective was dwelt on. And it was correct then, because we were showing a man, an old sweat, an old military man, returning to a Rome which he felt was sterile and intellectual, and needed to impress Maecenas and Agrippa with an experience which, because they hadn't had it, would have somehow made them poorer in life. But there was about all of that the sense that perhaps none of it was true. He was ripping them off. It was Traveller's Tales. But of course that was also a reaction to that particular kind of Rome. Now this year we have a very different Rome. We have a Rome which is alive, very youthful and very, very passionate, very volatile Rome. And so I need to respond to that in a different way. It's interesting, you know, as we've talked and talked, we started out by, first of all, in a very technical way, isolating verse, but in the last few minutes we've been talking increasingly about acting and the response to the verse from the emotional point of view. Well, what is different about it now, I feel, is that I feel a need to tell this story about Egypt, a need which comes from a man who believes he has shared in some kind of mystery, something which is almost a dream, that there is about Egypt, as compared to Rome, a spiritual quality, an indefinable something which he tries to reach out and touch. So that, when I said just there, I talked about the winds being lovesick with the sails because they were so perfumed, it was gross and exaggerated. I think that Enobarbus believes that there was a scent, a smell, a movement in the air. It really happened, something which created vibrations in him, that the women were like mermaids. There was a transformation on that river which lifted him, all of the observers, and obviously Antony too, out of the real life into something very much deeper, much more profound. And as at the end of the speech he says he will leave her never, because that one experience changed Antony for all time and changed Enobarbus for all time as well.
And the point is that that bit of language is capable of both readings, and that if we do persuade you to do Enobarbus in another 5 years' time, it's perfectly possible that there will be a third version that you will be able to talk about just as articulately and to refer to the text.
Perfectly possible. I feel the one most important thing about Shakespeare is that there is, and we have said this before, but I'll say it again because it's worth repeating, there is no one key that will open one door and reveal Shakespeare to you. There are many, many keys and many, many doors. And that's the one privileged piece of knowledge that acting Shakespeare has given me.
From the actor's point of view, I think the language, the actual business of the blank verse, or the rhythms that are involved, the technicalities that you've been talking about, is like a most sophisticated form of conveyance. I don't know if you think of some fantastic motor car or motor bicycle or something with a huge number of colossally complicated component parts, or an aircraft, spacecraft, some extraordinary thing which is, you have then got to, make it work, utilize it, and it's there to help you to go faster, to go slower, to change the gears, to ride this road or this sea or whatever, or through the space or whatever it is. I mean, that's what these things here are. They are the components. How you drive it, how you utilize what is there, is very much the thing that is going through your head as you're going on at the moment in which it exists in time.
To sum up where we've arrived at this stage, on the one hand we have the demands of intellect, and on the other hand the demands of instinct. And obviously for us, the fascination of doing the plays is that a kind of pendulum swings endlessly between those two extremes, and constant work and constant adjustment is necessary both in rehearsal and in the performing process in order to get that balance right or to keep that balance right. The RSC doesn't have a house style, even though it's been accused of it. I suppose the only thing that we're all agreed upon is that the starting point of all our work, the reference point while the work is going on, and the finishing point is the text, the word. We try to do productions which are meaningful for the times that we currently live in. But I hope that we have a healthy sense of history. We know that by the beginning of the next century, what we're doing now will be just as quaint and old-fashioned as those clips and recordings we used at the beginning of the program now seem to us. The most important thing is that people should be doing Shakespeare's plays and even doing Shakespeare workshops in 100 years' time. Good night.
And now thanks to the Royal Shakespeare Company for working with us on those two programmes.